us with the answers to the questions that we have to do your will. In Jesus' name we ask, amen. So this is about the challenges to country living. And I think the first thing to kind of put out there is that, there are many different challenges, and there may be different challenges for everybody here in the room. So my thought is, rather than diving in too deep right away, I do actually have a guide. If you go to adventhomesteads.com and click on guide, there's a lot of what I'll be talking about is kind of addressed here. So rather than just talking through that, if you guys are interested, we could have a little bit more of a dialogue. And I have a lot of content that we can get into about different problems that I see. Just kind of like, if we were to go through, just feel free to shout out, what are some of the issues that you guys identified with country living, or some areas that you say, I haven't made it, or maybe we look at it like this. Who's currently in the city that does not necessarily, is not convicted yet, they have to leave? Okay. Who's in the city but is convicted they don't want to leave, they just don't have a path out? Okay. And who's already in the country but is maybe having some challenges sustaining in the country? Okay. And is anybody in the country and thriving that we should use as a test case, as a best practice? Wonderful. All right.
I don't know what thriving is. But.
Okay. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the different types of roles then, maybe. And maybe we'll just launch into some terminology. I think for me, one of the first problems in country living is just being on the page, it's meaning like, what's country living? Right? We keep hearing these things like, you got to be in the country, but what does that mean? Because to some people, living in the country means living on top of a hill, like the Waldensians, right? And other people, country living means being close enough to a city to do work there, but being far enough away from the city to not be impacted by it. And so maybe that's a thing we can talk through. I think the first thing is that if we're to look at a map, right, and thinking about different population centers, that's where we should be working. So welcome to Sodom, population too many, right? What we're called here is that in God, it is God's design that our people should locate outside of the cities. And now she uses this word, outposts. And from these outposts, warn the cities and raise them memorials for God. There must be a force of influence in the cities that the message should be heard. So we have this word outpost. Does anybody have a definition for what an outpost means? Shout it out. Yes.
To live out in a country, but go into the city to work there.
Okay, so a place that you can, exactly. I think it's interesting if we look at what's the historical definition of an outpost. And it says it's a small military encampment. And by the way, Ellen White says that our church is likely fitted to be compared to the military. So we already have a nice similarity there. A military camp or position at some distance, right, from the main army. So the main army is going to be, the city. That's where the battlefront is. And there has to be now a place of retreat, a place just some distance from that main city. And it's interesting why. It says, used especially as a guard against surprise attack. So it's kind of interesting, like, is there a surprise attacks that the deceiver is planning for us? Okay. Did we see these surprise attacks? Was the pandemic, I think, used by God to wake us up, but was the pandemic also an attack from the deceiver? He was able to, had he been able to maintain that control, we would not have been able to leave our homes and seeing the beauty of nature, communicating with each other, going to church, right? We would not be able to do a lot of different things. And so, again, we need to remember a couple of pieces. One is that ultimately we are at war. Right? Whether we see that or not, it feels like we're not in war, right? And I saw this, like, as an example. When I was in the military, there were times that I was goofing off on base, and I forgot that sometimes I was even in the military, because it didn't seem like it, right? Even though, the week before I was deployed somewhere, and maybe the week after I was about to be deployed, but for a period of time, like, oh, well, I don't see any fighting right now. It's like we're just kind of chilling out here, and everything's normal. We acclimate to strange times. We are in very strange times, and there is a war going around us. And granted, we're not battling against other humans as much as we're battling against the principalities of darkness, right? And so that's that whole piece, is to think about, what is our role? And our role is to understand that we are at war. And our war is to also understand that there is a battlefield that we need to be close enough to attack at. Okay? So if we leave and we hide ourselves up in the mountains, there will be a time that we must, by the way. But if we're hiding up in the mountains, can we be a light to others? It's going to be harder. If we can be close enough to attack, but also far enough away to shield, that to me is a definition of an outpost in terms of the positioning of an outpost, as well as the roles. So we need to be able to attack the cities, bringing God's light into the cities. But we also need to shield ourselves from the darkness that's in the cities. So we're bringing light, shielding from darkness. We have a quote here: "We must make wise plans to warn the cities, but at the same time, live where we can shield our children and ourselves from the contamination and demoralizing influences so prevalent in these places." So hopefully this makes sense in terms of where are we to live. If we are in let's say a small community, let's say just outside of the city in a suburb, and we have great neighbors, we don't hear, I don't know, in that instance, Manelli or whatever the Romanian version, but we don't hear, rock music, bad music, or whatever it is, stuff that's going to pull you from God. If you have enough space to make a little garden, and you have maybe a ministry there, then you shouldn't be under this impression, I must leave this right now to go flee into the country, in the sense of like on the top of a mountain somewhere. Maybe God has you there for a reason. However, if you're in that same exact position, but your neighbors are constantly bombarding you, maybe there's riots, or there's crime, there's these different pieces, and you have children that are being impacted from that, maybe that's a call that place is not right for you, and you need to be further and further away. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't believe there's an exact mileage, although Ellen White talks about an hour and other things like this. I don't think there's an exact framework that we can follow for what is outside the city. I think it's contextual. So that's the other piece in this, is that our terminology needs to adapt to what our needs are. If you have a family, you may need to be further away than if you don't have a family, right? If you yourself are weak and a temptation, you may need to be further away than if you're saying, no, I'm out here, I'm grounded, and like Enoch, I'm going to go in. I'm only going to go in for a little bit of time because I don't want to be contaminated myself, but I'm going to go in and do the work and come back out again, right? If you're so far away that you can't go in and do the work, then we're not living up to the first purpose of this whole thing. So I guess with that, there's this idea that you'll need to be praying and asking God where the right distance is. I don't think that can be told by me. We do see that there's examples in Medical Missionary. It says that we are to secure properties in rural districts with easy access to the cities. So if it's possible to be 10 minutes outside of a city and feel like you're an hour away, wow, that seems like it would be a really good opportunity to do ministry. But how fast is the city, spreading, right? And so, thinking about if you want to make your center there and you know that, the city keeps expanding, well, then maybe it's not a long-term opportunity for you. But again, this is just what we read. The next is, under the heading, easy access to cities, we should, again, search for properties in rural districts, easy access to cities. And the reason is these should be suitable for training schools for workers and where facilities may be provided for treating the sick and worry souls to know the truth. So we start to see a little bit about what our mission is, what our battlefield mission is. Small training schools. Notice she used the word small, not massive training centers. She didn't ask for massive training centers where the student to teacher ratio is so low that the inmates are running the prison, so to speak, that the children are the ones influencing versus the educators influencing. Now she also says a place to treating the sick, the missionary aspect. We read in another publication, Letter 26, how we are to move other cities, establish sanitariums, schools, and offices away from the centers of population. So again, we kind of see this formula's coming out here. Treatment of the sick, that's the sanitariums, right? As we start moving these things out, we have the schools, training centers, and the offices could be different missional businesses. The other one she also mentions, as we look at these ministries that need to be away from the city, is we also see the need for, she says, publishing houses. Now, we know a modern-day publishing house could be books. It could also be YouTube. Publishing nowadays can be modernized, the idea of what publishing is. So we can kind of break these out into this. So we have our training centers, which are our schools, treatment centers, sanitariums, media centers, offices, publishing houses, etc. That's one component. And the second component is the homestead. So we've already learned that a homestead requires to shield from worldly influence. Right? We're going to learn a little bit about growing our own produce and hearing God's voice from nature. So again, under the header of working the cities from outposts, we read, "The Lord desires his people to move out in the country where they can settle on the land, raise their own fruit and vegetables, and where their children can be brought into direct contact with the works of God in nature. Take your families away from the cities," is my message. And then this is the homestead portion, right? A homestead just being a place where you can live and grow your own produce. Educate people to get out of the cities in the country where they can obtain a small piece of land and make a home for themselves and their children. This is where you start thinking about, what's my mission? If you have small children, maybe your mission fully should be raising them to give the final message, raising them to be in the 144,000. And maybe that is your primary mission. Ellen White speaks to that, how the primary focus of the mother should be on children. If you don't have children, then you have to decide, is there time for children? And if not, should my main focus then be 100% on a medical missionary, on a training center, training other people's children, or on some sort of training publishing house? But she does talk about this idea of making a home that's protected, as well as cultivating land. If the land is cultivated, it will, with the blessing of God, supply our necessities. And so if we were to kind of go back to that original thing of what is the two pieces, the first two pieces, right? It's going to be, ministry first, mission first, homestead second. Inside of the homestead, again, as we saw, we are to be protected, right? Shield from worldly influence. We are to grow our own produce. And the other piece we learned about true education yesterday is we need to be a place where we can hear God's voice. And to hear God's voice clearly, we need to be surrounded by his creation. So that's kind of the first two pieces. Now, the other piece on that is, how do we sustain? And God has given us systems to sustain. He just told us, the publishing houses, medical missionary centers, training centers, those should all be able to generate revenue for us. And so when we look at that, a missional business or a ministry that's also a business, those can be combined together. So again, how I would look at an outpost is three main components. One is the protection of ourselves and our children. Two is the ability to give a warning. Right? And three is to sustain financially. I believe, and we can talk maybe about that more, but I believe that those are the three main components. Again, we see that the cities are to be worked from outposts. Now, a question, though, is there anything inside of the city? If we're just kind of going through a definition, is there anything that God has called us to do inside the city? And we can find that answer as we start going through. Again, repeatedly, the Lord has instructed us that we are to work the cities from outpost centers. In these cities, we are to have houses of worship as memorials for God. So we get the first clue in country living that there are things that should be in the city, and that's houses of worship. We also read that vegetarian restaurants to be established in the cities. God would have restaurants established in the cities. If properly managed, these will become missionary centers, and these restaurants and publications should be kept at hand. So we're now starting to see that, okay, that missional component and the business component could be tied together. And some outpost centers may be wanting to have more than one revenue source, right? Maybe you're not just a training center, but you're also a training center that maybe has, or just a garden, just an, whatever it is, but you're also having a restaurant in the city, or you're also, thinking about what these other aspects can be. If we do have a restaurant, we read here that it's, we can also have it be a meeting house, right? But it says, ere long there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave will not be able. We must be preparing for these issues. So if we were to use this as an excuse to say, I kind of want to be in the city, so I'm going to do a mission, I'm going to do a city mission. Know that you're doing so at your, as Ellen White says, it's your soul's, at the chance of your soul's peril. So I think that if we can use, while there needs to be some focus on the cities, we need to be doing that with caution. Also, the restaurants should be done in a way that's altogether different from what ordinary restaurants have conducted. Now, unfortunately, I think that the world has already grabbed a hold of that, right? So I'm not sure how we're going to re-energize this, other than just the idea that we get back to the basics. The vegan movement has moved into a brown food movement, so maybe we re-energize it with green and red and colorful foods. But these are things that God can put on your heart. We also see that we should associate cooking classes with restaurants. So every restaurant should also be a cooking class. Instruction should be given in the regard of preparation of simple, healthful foods, and for those who wish to live in accordance with the principles of health reform. So we can kind of start seeing in the city, there could be a worship house, right? There could be a mission center, that inside that mission center could be a restaurant, a reading room with cooking classes. But again, we are warned that if we're too invested in the cities, we're at danger. So I want to just kind of say that while these are things that are inspired by the spirit of prophecy, at what year, at what stage, at what time? Are we living in, how much time do we have in order to establish these? Maybe it's a year-to-year lease, not a 5-10-year lease. You know? We also see that treatment rooms in vegetarian restaurants be associated together. So now she's painting a bigger picture. She's saying worship, houses of worship. She's saying restaurants with cooking schools, and restaurants potentially with treatment centers. And so now I'm wondering, how close are we to restaurants? Could we even make a destination? One of the things I would love to do is, rather going into a city, is to create a destination where people come out of the city to me. And they're just like able to have a really good restaurant, seeing nature, right? We're an hour from 2 major cities. We could have a really thriving restaurant, I believe, even that far out. It's a destination. And we could be reaching a class of people that maybe we otherwise wouldn't reach. Again, so this is this concept of city missions, and that's the terminology I'd like to utilize, is a city mission is restaurant, potentially treatment center, cooking classes, reading rooms. Those would be, and she also mentions they can be training centers for workers. So workers from the outposts could come into the city and learn how to actually practice evangelism versus learning evangelism in a closed bubble where they're only around other Adventists. But then again, I ask the question of, Ellen White says that there is no fixed formula. So could we also think about how can we bring people to us to practice evangelism on? And one example of that would be the woofing program, right? Or any volunteer stay program. Why not have, let's say, 30% of your rooms or 20% of your rooms available for non-Adventist, non-Christian even, people, and say, hey, come out of the city, help us with our farm, and in the meantime, but, just know that we are a Christian-based, center, and we would love for you to kind of learn what, kind of see how we live. That's what I did for a year. And I was part of the woofing program for about a year, and I had a bunch of people come out. It was really neat. Everybody left with a Bible. There's no better, look, here's my thing. You have to work to your gifts. I don't know how talented I am of going up to somebody in the street and handing a globe track and how much that has to happen, but how effective is that for me? What I found my effectiveness is when they come to me and they can see how we live and we can talk in a non-pressured sense, I found that effective. But again, there's different paths. In these city missions, we need to be thinking about spiritual literature as well as spiritual food. And again, just kind of move this forward here. Those would be the, as I see it, kind of the formula right now. City mission centers, houses of worship, restaurants and cooking classes, reading rooms, training centers. And then the outposts could be a different outpost, because you don't have to have all three of those in your outpost. One could be just a training center and a homestead. One could be just a sanitarium and a homestead. Although Ellen White does say that each sanitarium should also be a school. So I think the training centers are typically integrated with everything. And so again, these are just some ideas. We can look at how our, inside of the city, our houses of worship, we can kind of see outside of the city, having established different outposts with different themes, different missions. So that's kind of kind of summarizes maybe the terminology. Does anybody have a problem that they want to talk about next? They say, anybody say, any problems? They say, yes, but. Is it, who has a problem? It's say, finding land. Anybody? Okay.
I would say, I live in Germany, but I would say there's a lot of villages in Germany, and the way to live rurally is difficult. And it's under a lot of control. You've lived here in Germany, you know that
Yeah.
everything is in villages. And I think in the end time that's going to be a difficult situation for many Adventists, because villages are, they're away from the city, and yes, people think they're in the countryside, but there's a certain element of insecurity there.
So let's do this. Let's talk about the timelines, right? And then we'll get on the next question, the next problem. We have to understand there's 3 time frames. Time frame 1 is we're up in here, right? Time frame 1 is we are accessing the cities. We are working out of the cities. That's time frame 1. That's today. Okay, we should have already been working out of the cities. Honestly, I think we're at the end of this phase. Just a hunch. Phase 2 is we then work the cities only from outposts, which I think is what we should be clear that we should be doing. Really removing ourselves from the cities, but having enough contact to the city. This will get us through the time of trouble. Right? The idea is that Ellen White also tells us that if we're doing all different ways in order to, we should be building community. So we shouldn't be so far away we can't connect with people. We should just make sure that the contaminating influences, if there's a casino in your area, maybe move away from that. If there's a bar down the street, maybe move away from that. Just remove yourself from any contaminating influence, especially if you have kids. But when you feel like you're just at a distance, because there is limitations, we can't all live on a 10-hectare plot somewhere, right? There's limitations. You may only have a few hundred square meters. Can you find a place that there's some, that you aren't contaminated? That's the first point. The second piece on that is that we are to use that influence. We should be able to be like neighborly, and the best way to do that is if we have people around us that we can witness to. But there's a third time frame, which is what we understand is, Jacob's time of trouble. At that point, none of us are going to be in any of these centers, more than likely. More than likely, that's when everybody literally runs to the wilderness like the Waldensians and is living crowded 8 people to each cabin or something, who knows? But there's going to be a time where a lot of people that can't find the country land may need to migrate to centers that do. And so, I think God will provide the answers to that. I think we can trust that calling out will be so in connection with him that we'll hear his voice almost directly. That says, okay, Rob, it's time. Let's head for the hills. We're also going to see, it says the siege of Jerusalem, the whole concept. But I think right now we should not be planning on how do I get to a place where there's no neighbors. We should be planning on how do I get to a place where there's no contaminating influence and where I can be an influence on my neighbors. And I think that's kind of the thought process there. But if you guys have any other thoughts, definitely jump in. So we mentioned kind of this idea of finding land. I do see this as a main problem. We read how, again, that I think maybe our expectations are too big. I wanted I'm doing my little searches, no less than 10 hectares was my search, right? And it was a year that I was looking for land. And for one reason or another, didn't have papers. It was way too expensive. They didn't have water. There was always a reason that God stopped me from going outside the city. But maybe we reset our expectations to something that's, if I'm especially understanding what we're working with. If I'm a solo person, or I'm a person, let's say, and I have 2 very small children, I'm not going to be able to work 10 hectares if I could work a 1,000 square meters, right? Understanding what our responsibilities are. And that's, I think, a challenge. I think the other piece is that it comes down to when we're finding land, setting expectations, saying it could be small. There's a quote, Zechariah, do not despise the small beginnings. There's too much of our mindset, and I know I'm only speaking from my experience right now, too much of my mindset was, I've got to get to the final destination of a place that I can be through Jacob's time of trouble, through the great time of trouble, not the small time of trouble. But that's not what God asked me to do, because he still wants me to be doing so much more. And so I believe he's closed the door from me leaving the cities, because that was the mindset that I had. I think the other piece on this is, what is our reasoning for leaving the city? I had a couple contact me last Sunday. They called me up from the UK and they said, Rob, we're trying to find, we know that you can have creative ways to generate revenue. We need to generate revenue. I'm like, okay, well, what's the reason? Well, because we need to buy land. We're going to get outside the city. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the mission? Well, we want to have a homestead for ourselves. But what's the mission? Well, we're going to think about that and find that out. Okay, that's maybe your problem. All right? I'll use my example. So it was in the world. I had properties in Hawaii, I had properties in Southern California, Northern California. I was good. God called me out of that. And he said, hey, Rob, it's time to come back home. So I literally went back home to my parents' house. And that was humiliating, to say the least, sleeping, after being retired, to sleeping in your parents', in your old bedroom of when you were a kid. For a while. Yeah, but that's a whole thing, though. It's kind of like, Rob, go take out go take out the trash, whatever. It's like, do you know who I am? Do you know, but that was the humiliation that had to happen. God put me through that. Then, I start building a tiny house on my grandma's property. And then God allows me to buy my own acre of land behind that. And I start to rebuild because I walked away from everything. And I start to rebuild. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm working on this, 1,000-liter submersed propane tank, right? I'm like, I got my prepper stuff going on, and I had it all set up. It was going to be amazing. And then God, through a series of incidents, brought me to Romania. Every crazy story starts with a girl, so that's why I'm in Romania. And what God showed me, though, was that I was not to first live in the city for myself, but I wasn't even supposed to live in the country for myself. And so we came here, but I didn't fully learn it yet. And the first year I'm here, I'm looking for land in Timisoara, outside of Timisoara, because that's where I was stationed at. Looking for land, can't find it. I eventually just say, okay, I'm done. I'm done looking for land. I don't even care about anything anymore. Let's just do ministry, because clearly this is not going to work. I'm done. And this group of people will say, hey, can you come out and help us? And I'm like, yeah, I can come out and help. And I have just enough money to buy a good amount of land. I had about 200,000 I could buy some land with. And I come out and help these people, and I was like, okay, well, I don't because God has not opened a door for me to get land. Here, take this much money, finish this project that you guys need to finish, whatever, and God will figure it out for me, right? Just literally abandoning every opportunity that I could to get land of my own. And then, out of the blue, this guy back here says, Rob, because I was going, okay, I did my part, I'm going to go. He's like, stay here, build something. And he just keeps giving me more pieces of land to keep building something, right? But that's the whole thing is I don't even want it in my name, but I love the fact that I can utilize it for God. And I think that's the bigger piece is that when my mentality changed, when I stopped trying to get land for myself in my own homestead, God just gave me land to utilize for a school. And I think that's the big thing is that, we need to have that mind shift. The other kind of piece of this is that we understand that we should be securing properties at a low figure. We read this again, not once, but twice. That we will be getting land with suitable buildings as a gift from the owners or purchased at a reasonable rate by the gifts of our people. So this brings to a question, and the question is, right, what is the purpose? Because if we're trying to do ministry, God's already promised to us, He'll give us the land. So I want to ask yourselves, right, if you're paying full price for land, are you even doing God's will? Do you get that? If you have to pay full price for the land, then it's not what God promised. So maybe it's not God's will. It's just a thought. Again, I can't speak for everybody. I'm just speaking through when you just radically just abandon self, it's interesting how God provides. Any thoughts or any on finding land? And Ellen White does have things about what to be looking for, right? She tells us ideally evergreen trees, ensuring you have a good source of water, right? She gives us other indicators of what our land should look like. Good soil is incredibly important, right? And get away from contaminating influences. Sir?
I would say when you're looking for land, stay away from large rivers because with the weather we're having today, flooding is very enormous.
Yeah. So thinking about
We had a city here in Germany that took a very hard hit with water and they still haven't recuperated.
Yeah. So thinking about the topology, thinking about, and this is kind of an idea of creating a site map, a zone map, right? You can kind of go through and you can say, okay, where's the noise pollution coming from? Roads, things like this. Where's even the light pollution coming from? Where's this, is there actual pollution? Like, do you have a large agricultural next to you? Do you have a large industrial next to you? Like thinking about what are all the different contaminants and also thinking about, is this going to be a good land? So I'll talk maybe a little bit more about this idea of the problem of mindset. I think that's kind of what we're talking about right now is this mindset of why am I trying to leave the cities? And I think if we are able to develop the right mindset, God will just open up the doors for us. So what is that mindset that we need to prepare? And I think the first thing is we should not be thinking about this as some great, loss, right? It's not a great deprivation. For us to go in the cities and countries, this is a blessing to learn of God and his will and his way. I feel like we have this mindset of what success looks like is the fancy car, fancy house, all the amenities. But maybe we should be thinking about what success looks like is a deeper connection with God. And whatever it takes at any cost in order to achieve that should be made. We read again, do not consider privation. She says again, to leave the cities and move out in the country places. Here await rich blessings for those who will grasp them by beholding the scenes of nature and the works of the Creator. By studying God's handiwork, imperceptibly, you will be changed in the same image. If we remember, what was the purpose of even moving out of the cities? It wasn't to save our life here on earth. It was to develop a character to save our soul and to save other souls. We shouldn't be thinking about how can I save my life. We should have killed ourselves a long time ago, as Paul says. Not literally, but emotionally, just giving up, reckless abandonment of self. So looking through this, our goal should be to be changed in the same image as God. And it says that the way that we do that is by seeing nature. To see nature, we have to move out of the cities. So the call is not to move out of the cities. You get in this, right? It's a linear chain. The call is not to move out of the cities. The call is the call is not even to go be in nature. The call is to understand our role and restore the character into Christ's image. Two things that are going to come out of leaving the city, though, is lessons on self-reliance and self-control. Right? Self-reliance is the ability to have confidence that says, I can build my own house, I can build my own garden, because I'm not a slave to this world. God has made me a king, and I have the ability to do powerful things through him that strengthens me. Self-control is everything else. It's remembering that we have to be more frugal, understanding diet, understanding restraints, not being lazy, being productive. These are all things of self-control that are hard to learn in the city when you can push a button on an app and everything comes to you. Remembering again that self-control and self-reliance are going to be working on our characters. And the purpose is to return to God's original plan for man. But we must move forward prayerfully. The wisdom of any human agent is not sufficient for planning and devising at this time. spread every plan before God with fasting, with humbling the soul before the Lord Jesus, and commit our ways to the Lord. The sure promise is he will direct our paths. So if we're unclear on the path to take, submit the plan to God. Fasting, humbling, and just letting go of self. And God promises us that he'll direct our paths. If we think candidly, prayerfully, and studying the word with all carefulness and prayerfulness, with the mind and the heart, we will awaken to hear the voice of God. And to understand the will of God is a great thing. So if we want to hear God's voice, think candidly, prayerfully, and study the word. If in this opportune time the members of the churches will come humbly before God, putting in their heart all that is wrong and consulting in every step, he will manifest himself to them. And will give them great courage. Give them courage in him. I feel like maybe there's some pieces missing here, right? Of this idea of, coming humbly before God, looking at God every step, but it doesn't end there. Let him not move hesitatingly, because it feels like up to this point, just that counsel says, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait and God will tell me what to do. I'm going to keep waiting. But God has already told us what to do. That's the weird thing. To every man was given his work according to his several ability. Then let him not move hesitatingly. Don't hesitate. Move firmly and humbly trusting God. God has already said, create a mission, identify which mission, right? And move. So what are we waiting for? Right? Submit that plan before God, pray over it. But, this interesting thing, and I'm not sure if this works for everybody, it works for me. I used to pray, God, open a door for me. But I have so many doors open for me that I stopped praying that prayer. And now I pray, God, close every other door except for the one you want me to go through. Now, be ready for disappointment, because God will close. I have found every other door. And then I sit there, I'm like, see, God, you left me here alone. I'm all alone because you're not letting me do anything. And he's like, hey, dummy, you just prayed to close all the doors you want me going through. And I did that. So now I have to pray, again, close all the doors, but leave one open for me that's in the right direction at least. What I find now is he's now opening up hallways. He doesn't open up a door for me anymore. A lot of times he opens a hallway. And I just keep walking down a hallway. I know it's the right direction. I keep building an ecosystem that nobody seems to understand or want, right? I keep walking down a direction that I think I'm crazy and just keep walking in, but it's a hallway. I have to understand it's a hallway. You got to trust, you got to move forward. We must not hesitate, we must move forward, but everything must be done with planning. God is a God of order. Everything connected with God is in perfect order. Subjection and thorough discipline mark the movements of an angelic host. Success can only attend order and harmonious action. If we're doing things chaotically, if we're doing things rashly, and we're doing things in a way that they're not harmonious to either God's words or the surrounding that he's put us with, then how can it be God's way? Let there be nothing done in a disorderly manner, that there may be a great loss or sacrifice in the property becomes ardent and compulsive. So again, when we hear the message, get out of the city, it's a message that's very urgent, but if we respond out of fear, we're going to fail. So we have to respond in a way that is calculated. Let everyone take time to consider carefully, not to be like the man in the parable who began to build a house but was not able to finish. Right? We can't do things on our own and then expect God to fill in the gaps if God has given us the better plans. We need to consider everything, weigh everything. So there's a balance, right? And one of the big pieces is it's hard for me because it feels a lot of times like the information is conflicting, right? Do everything carefully, move forward without hesitation, right? The difference is that if you have that relationship, our goal is not to get out of the country. Again, it's to build the relationship with Christ. So I feel like the more we are humbling ourselves and praying and like God, just like lead the next step, I think he'll do this. And these all otherwise conflicting statements seem to then synergize. The other piece, though, is to think about what's our skill set. We've been in Egypt for so long. We need to assess our experience level. We've been in Egypt. We've lost who we are. We've lost so much. Great caution must be exercised by those who do not have genuine experience in practical life. I've heard too many stories of people that say, okay, I'm going to follow God's will. I'm going to jump out to the country. And after like a year, they're like, this is too hard. I couldn't make it. I have no idea what a garden was. And they come back in. They say, God's wrong. And he was lying to me. So I believe that we need to be thinking about how we can prepare even now. There may be individuals who will make a rush to do something and enter into some business they know nothing about. God does not require that. Right? A lot of times, we're going to go and we're going to hear advice. We've probably heard a lot of advice here already. Some of that advice may not actually be good for us. An example of this. One of my mentees came to me, and I'm not trying to point any fingers, whatever it is. Just one of my mentees came to me and he said, hey, I need to learn how to do, I was just told that I need to go to Israel and I need to minister to businessmen in Israel. And I said, oh, praise God. Do you know Hebrew? No. Do you know business? No. Have you been to Israel before? No. Okay. Did God tell you this? No, this guy I talked to told me that this is the way to do it. Okay. What I'm trying to say, now, not that that's a bad thing, it's just the idea is that we are given a specific gift and a specific skill set and a specific path. We can't allow somebody to tell us what our path is. That'll come from God. So what I'm trying to say here is that if someone tells you, and we're going to talk about some different business opportunities in a little bit, and if somebody's telling you this is the only business opportunity that you need to do, you need to figure out first, was that God leading that person to tell me this? Right? And you can look back at what are my natural abilities? What do I have the capacity to do? What do I have maybe already training in? What's the lens that God has already given me that I'm looking through? And does that align with that advice? We read here, I will address the words of the church at Battle Creek, and she moves on here, that we need generals. And there are a lot of people that are without direction, without the capacity. They've been in Egypt too long to understand where to go and how to do things. Oh, for wise generals, wise and considerate, balanced men who will be safe advisors, who will have some insight into human nature and know how to direct and counsel in the fear of God. I'm looking at the graybeards in the room who have the experience. You guys are the ones that need to be the generals that are telling the kids what to do, that are guiding them, not just telling them, but helping them. Here's the thing, let me take that back. Not telling them what to do, telling them how to think, telling them how to ask questions, how to process data. The strength of the army is measured largely by the efficiency of the men in the ranks. Wise general instructs his officers to train every soldier in acts of service. There's so many quotes, I can't get into all these, about wise generals and how we need to have knowledge in practical life. So again, I think a piece of this kind of moves into this idea of the next problem, which is we may have limitations individually that say, I can't go do God's work. Or let's say this, I can't go move in the country right now. I don't have the skills. I don't have the land. I don't have the money. I don't have the things. And you may be right. Maybe God has allowed you to develop in a way that is a spoon or a fork or a knife, right? This idea is a very specific purpose. When I think of like the challenges to country living, which is, I guess, the name of this topic, there's a lot to run a homestead, an outpost, even more so. I'm just talking about a homestead. Homestead being a piece of an outpost that supports the people that are there doing the mission. I'm not even talking about doing the mission yet. I'm talking about just sustaining an outpost is a lot of work. And when I moved out of the city to the country, it was a full-time job for me just to maintain the yard, nevertheless try and build a house, nevertheless trying to maintain a garden, right? Just landscaping is a lot of work sometimes. So we may be at a place where we've actually got that under control. Maybe we're in that group that says, I've mastered country living, right? Individually, it takes a lot of time to set up infrastructure. It takes a lot of time to set these pieces up. And you may be at a point, you may be at a place where you realize, I may be able to handle the infrastructure side, the gardening side, all of this, even, but do I have time, for ministry? Maybe the next question is, I have time to do all of this, but, am I making any money? Right? I can manage the homestead, but, maybe my husband needs to make some money, or my wife needs to be making the money, or I need to bring another couple in that can help with the money. I can do this part, but they have to do this part. Like, you start seeing this idea that there's a lot of pieces to require this. We're building our system of living that used to be completely intertwined, where we understood how to live, we had some sort of skills, we had networks, we had large family structures. Lucifer has meticulously destroyed each one of those. Our family structure no longer exists. Even in the 1800s, average family size was over 10 people, as in children. Then you add on the fact that they a lot of times lived with their parents, supporting their parents, and even had, their children hadn't moved out yet. You could look at 40 people in a family unit. That's enough to run a homestead and to do ministry and to do business. 40 people, no problem. What's the average family look like now? Right. So what I'm saying is that maybe there's a mindset shift that has to happen to understand that we cannot live on our own anymore. There are a lot of talks about finances. We can get into that later if we have time here, obviously. The next piece is, even if I am able to manage the homestead, am able to manage the business, that's not what we're called to do. We're called to run a ministry. We're called to evangelize. And so we need to be thinking about what's our mission first, what's the ministry we have to do, and then how do we put food on table and roof over their head of the people that are running the ministry, and how do we pay the cell phone bills and the gas requirements, for the people running the ministry. So again, it needs to be a shift. To live in the country is full-time responsibility. It feels like we can't balance both on our own. At least that's not for me anyways. We need to understand our individual limitations and embrace what Ellen White says, a diversity of gifts. Evangelism tells us let not one man feel his gift alone is sufficient for the work of God. But why do we do this? Why do we feel like we're the only ones out there? Again, like I mentioned earlier, the Elijah, right? I'm the only one out here doing anything. No, there are more, but you're not looking. Maybe you don't want to play well with others. Maybe you're the kid in the park with the little ball. This is mine. Maybe you need to play well with others. Maybe that's why you feel alone. That's maybe why I feel alone. Right. One is stronger in some essential part, where another is weak. Understand that God has a plan and a path for us. Manuscript 21, 1894. In all the Lord's arrangement, there's nothing more beautiful than his plan of giving to men and women a diversity of gifts. Ellen White goes on another quote, how she says that God loves bouquets of flowers, and he sees us as individual little flowers. So together, God is saying, I love a diverse bouquet. That's what I want sitting on my mantelpiece, is a diverse bouquet, right? Not one single rose in a vase. That doesn't please God. He says, a diversity of gifts. One meek worker may be a speaker, another a writer, someone who is fervent in prayer, gift of singing, clearness with God, explaining the word. Each gift has become a power to God, for God. One gives wisdom, another knowledge, faith. The diversity of gifts leads to diversity of operations. So one of the things I recommend doing is thinking about an inventory. Start with yourself. What are the gifts that God has given me? Now, I have a whole longer course on this, which I don't have time for. What would you do in your free time, etc. The second thing is figure out what are things that when you finish doing it, you have more energy than when you started the task. Revenue. Right? When we look from our own lens only, we say, I've heard, and just like, or I would just love to cook for people if I didn't have to worry about finances. I just want to be out of the city. I would love to be in the country. I'm willing to help around. I don't know how, I don't have land. I don't know where to go. Somebody else's lens, right? They could say, I have this ministry that God has given me to do. All I want to do is do that, but I can't because I have to, make money. But if I could be in a place where someone, fed me and had a place to stay, I'm willing to go all in for God. And then there's me, which ironically, the whole reason I wanted to start this whole network is because I was the head. And now I'm not making any money, which is, I'm asking God why that is. But I was supposed to be the head. And my whole thought is, all I want to do is launch companies, but have somebody that's be able to walk through the garden and have really good food and have somebody that also I can support to do ministry. And if that's the case, then but now I'm kind of being the ministry and the hand. I don't know. It's God is having me do roles that like, I'm questioning my logic here because, but I know God has a plan. So the hands are people that we should, be or find the hand. And the hand is somebody that says here, many are unwilling to earn their bread in the sweat of their brow and refuse to till the soil. But the earth has a blessings hidden in the depths of those that encourage and willing to perseverance to gather treasures. We should find people that are willing to work the soils or be that person. Many farmers have failed to secure adequate returns from the land because they have undertaken the work and thought it was degrading employment. There are people that think that farming, being the hand, is a negative thing. Being a hand is actually one of the best things. There's a lot of personal joy there. We need people that are not just doing the work, but also organizing the work. And those are all hands. I think if you look at the next piece, we would see then the heads. Be or find a head that can join your community. Right? Those are situated, they cannot act a part in personal labor, may interest themselves in bearing the expense of a laborer who can go. No practical Christian lives to himself. There's so many pieces that Ellen White tells us that for those that are amazing at what they do, that God has given them a gift, they should be supported financially. But to do that, we need to develop really a different mindset of radical generosity. Right? God has not ordained that one worker should have a superabundance while his fellow worker is so bound by a lack of means that he cannot accomplish the work that you've done. So if you're sitting on a pile of cash in your bank account, that's not God's will, especially when you see workers that need to be accomplishing the work. Again, we see here, no practical Christian lives to himself. Them that believed, when we look at Acts, like this is all I want out of life. Honestly, right now, I want to go to Acts 4. How do we fast forward to that? I know it's not going to happen until after the sealing, the shaking, but man, could it happen in small pockets? Right? None of the believers, all of them that believed were of one heart, one soul. Neither had anything of them that they thought that he owned of his own. They all had things in common. Neither was among them any that lacked. Distribution was made that everyone had according to his need. Now, granted, yes, this is socialism, right? I want Adventist socialism. That's all I want out of life. Is what it is. We need to be thinking about how we can serve, not be served. And this whole piece of this is, I think the angels, I think how the angels must feel, seeing the end approaching, and those who claim to have the knowledge of God in Jesus Christ, whom he sent, huddle together, colonize, attend meetings, and feel discouraged and dissatisfied, as if there's much preaching to benefit their souls and strengthen the church, while they're doing literally nothing. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Right? There's this whole idea of we need to be thinking about how can we serve and not be served. Even that means going to church. I have people say, I don't want to go to church. There's no value in it to me. I'm not being fed. Okay, then go and feed. Volunteer to do the Sabbath school, whatever it is. I don't know. The bigger picture is, I would love for us to get that idea of like the Amish, the Mennonites, right? Why aren't we doing more barn raisings? Somebody has a piece of land. Why don't we just say, hey, everybody, let's come together. Who's got skills? You're a bricklayer, you're a carpenter, whatever it is. Let's come together, let's get this mission house done. How fast things could happen. Here's the thing. To let you know how fast, we built 4 cabins in just over a month with like 5 boys. Okay, so like 5 boys plus me, we built ultimately 5 cabins in about 6 weeks. So stuff can happen when you're motivated. Also, I'm a bit of a drill sergeant. We work pretty hard, but that's not the point. The point is we can do a lot if we just come together. But we keep focusing on self. The sin which is indulged to the greatest extent and which separates us from God and produces so many contagious spiritual disorders is selfishness. There can be no returning to the Lord except in self-denial. We talked about the beautiful presentations earlier on the Waldensian movement. They exemplified self-denial. So if we are to figure out how we can start coming together, we've got to overcome selfishness. And that's a pretty big problem. When I usually ask what the next problem would be, and I think I'm How am I doing on time? I'm over, right? Am I done? A few more minutes? Okay. The next piece, so I won't go into the whole thing of this one here, but I do want to teach you guys a little framework. There's a need for financial sustainability. And everyone's like, yeah, Rob, couldn't you just start with that one? But we'll get to it. This is the last one on the list here. Is the idea of it takes money to run an outpost. It takes a lot of money to run an outpost. But it takes less money to run an outpost if we're practicing frugality, if we're getting vegetables from our own garden. It takes less money to run an outpost. It takes even less money to run an outpost if instead of thinking about, can I get money, I need money to start my outpost, what if you said, I need donated labor, I need donated workforce, I need donated items. We have a lot of things in our hand that God has allowed us to maintain, but not so we could hold on to it for us. We should have some sort of classified ad system that's like, hey, I've got 20 extra pieces of plywood. I've got OSB, whatever it is. I've got this. I got this. Like, what do we have? I can help out with. I got a skill saw. How can we start thinking about not asking God for a bunch of money, but asking God to send people who's a heart that's willing to help. Also, if we can form a barter network, it will reduce the amount of money we actually need. We keep thinking about the world's way, which is fiat currency. It doesn't make sense. Money's not actually real. Money is actually debt. This is a whole thing, but I'm going to start sounding like somebody's crazy uncle if I get into it, so I'm not going to get into it. The point simply is, if we think differently, we don't need as much money as we think. We should be able to get the land for free or for heavily discounted. We should be able to bring our brothers and sisters together to be able to help with a donated workforce. We should be able to form relationships with networks, outposts around us to reduce what we have to buy. But there still is some money that needs to be earned, made. So then the question is, where are the sources of that money? And so I wanted to kind of teach you guys a quick little framework on thinking about how to generate money for your outpost. And we'll end with this. There's two ways to earn money. Money from outside the outpost, money coming from within the outpost. Does that make sense? So on an axis, there's two, right? Again, external money, internal money. Is that okay if we use those labels? External money is money coming from outside the outpost. Internal money is money being generated inside the outpost. We can think of this as start forming quadrants. So the first axis is where is the source of the money? Internal, internal. By the way, this is an exercise I do. The more we start thinking like this critically, our brains change. And all of a sudden we see everything much clearer. It feels like a lot of people I talk to, a lot of my mentees and students that come to me, their brain is a mess because they haven't logically put things in boxes in their brains. If you can start thinking about how do I plot things on axes, all of a sudden they'll get some clarity. So I just think about how you can practice this potentially. I'll just do one exercise now. Money from outside the, external money, internal money. Another axis would be, is this active or passive money? Okay, is this active in the sense that I have to create an additional, like I've got to launch a business, or is it passive that says, how can I use what I'm currently doing and just leverage that to generate revenue? So our axes are going to be essentially these quadrants of internal, external, passive or active, or we could say additional effort or just a byproduct of our current efforts. And what I recommend doing the next is to then form an act, you take each quadrant and just give it a label. So external money that you have to do something additional would be a city mission center. We talked about those already, right? Those are the restaurants in the city, different things. External money that's a byproduct of what I'm actually doing already, meaning that I don't have to start any new business, would be a donation. I'm not starting a new business. People see what I'm already doing. External people giving me money, it's a donation. If we have internal money that's, let's say, additional, that would be an outpost missional business. We already heard about those. Sanitariums, treatment centers, training centers, media houses, publishing houses. And what's the other one, though? Can we make money internally by a byproduct of our lifestyle? So my recommendation is start thinking creatively and just say, do any of these four, could I develop revenue from any of these four quadrants? Could I develop revenue for all four of these quadrants with enough coordination? Some examples of each of these would be externally, restaurant, a cooking school. We heard about those already. Those are the city centers on the top right. On the bottom left, internal additional would be treatment centers, training centers, publishing houses. Those are what God is, we opened the talk with those three things. That's what God has asked us to do. Externally, we could start a YouTube channel. If you're doing a mission, you can actually generate a good amount of money from a YouTube channel. You could also give your kids something to do. You can also ask for sponsorships. Well, you can ask for donations, which is like, hey, just give me money. But a donation that you do on a regular basis would be a sponsorship. Are you willing to sponsor this training program we're doing next year? Are you willing to be a Patreon and get access to our YouTube content a week early? It sounds silly. I'm actually a patron of a few different channels that I want to support. So there's ways that we can actually utilize external technologies to showcase what we're doing. It's a ministry, showing people how we live, right? It's like having them do a site tour internally. And that could be an internal byproduct. You could actually have people come and sell tickets or ask for donations for people to come to you and do an eco tour on your property, do a garden tour on your property. The Amish do that. The Amish are great at that. Hey, come out here and we're gonna, put on a show for you. We're gonna, that's what they do. Let us show you how we live. We're called to show people how Christ wants us to live. We could also look at saying, can I open this up for hospitality? Could I have maybe a few rooms that we're renting out? That's a byproduct of an internal. Could I use maybe one of those rooms that we bring in a financial contributor who is living there and is financially helping out? So they're working remotely at this location and are willing to give a percentage, if not all, at least just a percentage of their income in order to help sustain the place. Could you even have a restaurant that you allow families to come in? Okay. So we don't have time to go through each of these, but I do actually recommend that you use another decision-making approach and look at what's the pro and con for each of these. And so take each of these and say, okay, outpost industry, the pro, what's the con? And score those and kind of go through that. So I'll end here, but I do just want to say again, think about how you can look at the opportunities in your hand, look at the opportunities from your network, and see how you can generate revenue for God. How you can change your mindset to be a mindset of mission first, not of country living first. And see how God opens up doors for you. Think about how we can come together like Acts 4, even before the outpouring of the latter rain. Could we start coming together in pockets where we just say, we're going to have some challenges, but we desire to go all in for God, and let's help each other out. So with this, I'll go ahead and just close with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just come before you again, and we ask that you guide our minds individually. Lord, you know that you've given each of us our individual gifts. Lord, we ask that you start forming bouquets of flowers in each outpost, bringing a different flower as needed in order to build a beautiful bouquet that can be effective for you. Lord, I also ask that you help us to remember that we are at war and that you've given us skills for the battlefield. And some of those skills are to be on the front line, and some of those skills are to be in the outpost supporting the frontline workers. Lord, I ask that you impress upon us the need for radical generosity, to understand that nothing that we have is actually of our own, and that we need to reset what we understand as living, as country living. Help us to be doing things from the right reasons, and help us not to be trying to save self, but ultimately to be trying to save others. In Jesus' name I ask, amen.